Good morning, everybody. As a common noun, Machinima refers to the use of real-time graphic software to create animated videos. But as a proper noun, Machinima refers to the California-based media company. Alan DeBevoise is the chair and chief executive officer of that company, and as such, he's responsible for acquiring and leading the production of content for what's become a dominant video entertainment network. Machinima is the #1 entertainment channel on YouTube and is currently delivering 1.6 billion video views a month, and that number is climbing. I will note that Alan will be taking a series of short business meetings after this session. You can contact Sky Davies at the Biz Hub to set up that meeting. Alan, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
Give us a sense of where Machinima, the company, came from.
Well, where I first heard about Machinima, well, I was in the computer animation field for a long time, and a good friend of mine who was the founding CTO of a company called Wavefront Technologies, which ultimately became part of Alias and a lot of the other computer animation companies, called me one day and said, have you seen what these Machinima guys are doing, meaning lowercase Machinima? And the idea was that they were using real-time game engines to render content and create stories, like Red versus Blue and some of the sort of seminal pieces that were first coming out. And so we went out and saw a game developer that was using Machinima tools to do previewing, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting because you were seeing people that were kind of hybrid gamer filmmakers start to use that environment and really almost filmmaking in a virtual world. So, I met Hugh Hancock and a bunch of the early pioneers, and then really thought this could be a cultural movement. This could be, young males. The games are getting better. YouTube is really starting to take off. The combination of distribution and the quality of the games, I think brought together, and ultimately later, all these new video devices really created a flashpoint.
The technology of video production, that technology has become much more affordable, much simpler to use. How critical was it for an online distribution network for that creative work to be showcased? How critical was that?
Well, I mean, there are a couple things that happened at once for us. One was, Halo, they always, that game and particularly that environment really embraced this idea of a community creating video. And, obviously there were games before that, but that sort of was the flashpoint, if you will, at some point. And then YouTube as well. And so then I think the opportunity of making that happen really came together that way. And in fact, when we first decided to go up on YouTube, we actually focused only on the game Halo, right? That was sort of like, let's get this right, let's figure it out, what does this community care about? And then after that, we sort of widened to the first-person shooter market and then kept widening from there.
The sort of progression of the company from exclusively game engine stuff to video content that is about gaming might seem to be an interesting one. Can you talk a bit about why you made that shift?
Yeah, I mean, I think we thought always that the gaming culture, if you will, the world deeply rooted in the gaming idea was kind of the edge of popular culture, and people hadn't embraced it. Of course, now everybody looks at everything from Big Bang Theory to Walking Dead and to all the huge movies that are made and all the huge games, and realizes this is beyond mainstream, right? This audience is a huge driver of not only entertainment themselves, but obviously influential. They're tech-centric, lean forward kind of audience. So even in the home, they're incredibly influential about what happens. So we started to think about it being a global entertainment brand that was deeply rooted in gaming as opposed to just in gaming. But gaming is critical to the core of what we do.
Because in traditional media, the decisions are still being made by people who don't maybe understand or appreciate the strength of geek culture. Right. And you're capitalizing on that.
Yeah, and I think one of the great ironies is that the two giant categories on YouTube by far are music videos and gaming videos. And these two categories are actually not good in linear television. And we've actually seen that happen before. When we went from the broadcast world only to the cable world, we saw new categories, MTV, Discovery, other types of categories 24-hour news, 24-hour sports that showed up that the previous model said, well, that's impossible. You can't make a documentary channel and make that work, right? But obviously, it's one of the most sought after networks, on cable. And what happens here is the same thing. What's endemic about the medium of online video, this multi-platform world? Well, it's really search and on demand and a lot of those kinds of things, which actually drive these segment audience. And this is really the key here, which is broadcast in the television world is based on how much can I get a lot of different people to see something. What we see are these crazy fanatic audiences that are very, very segmented. It could be Call of Duty game player fans, right? Now, you could never put that on television, nor could you get an audience big enough, say, in Sweden to make that make sense. But because YouTube is a global platform, 850 million people around the world, and these devices have shown up, right? So that the number of points where you actually get video now is vastly increased. Then you have the opportunity to create large segments, right? That of perspective. And then to use the music analogy, I think part of the problem that MTV had is you may be a Lady Gaga fan and therefore possibly a Madonna and Beyonce fan, but maybe not a Kanye West and Eminem fan. And in linear television, you'd have to kind of watch both of those. But in the world of, say, Vivo, you'd only care about what you care about when you care about it. And so therefore, you can drive passion points in a much bigger way.
So we're now seeing more traditional companies trying to take advantage of segmented audiences in this way. You've got a leg up. You've got some experience. Do you think that there are some things about what Machinima has done that traditional media companies can learn from?
Yeah, I mean, I think the model is somewhat the same and somewhat different. One of the things that's really interesting to me is to meet executives that launched early cable networks, because there are some things they went through, like MTV or HBO, that we learn from all the time, and they do some fantastic things, obviously. A couple of the differences, I'd say, is we embrace a programming model that is both top-down and bottoms-up. So we'll release a show like Mortal Kombat or the new Halo series, live-action series, that's actually produced in a traditional studio in a traditional model, but also a huge amount of the traction is from users, right? So I think there's bottoms-up, top-down. We're instantly global. We're global right from the outset. We don't think about, we do it for our country and then decide to transport it. We're global and we're multi-platform. So I think those are some of the key issues that we think about. And then there is a range of content that can range anything from gameplay and tips and things like that, all the way to things like some of these shows like Receiver and Mortal Kombat and Halo, which are live action, episodic narratives that are the kinds of things that are in the vein of Walking Dead and Game of Thrones and those kinds of content.
You mentioned Mortal Kombat and Halo. Mortal Kombat's an example of a franchise that was birthed anew because of a production that appeared on Machinima. The new Halo live-action series is one where an IP is being stretched across a different medium to help sell a product, the video game. Those are two good examples of how Machinima can provide an outlet for existing IPs.
Yeah, exactly. And the actual Mortal Kombat story is a fascinating one, because it really gets to one of the big value propositions we bring to the table is driving IP into the marketplace. In other words, getting large numbers around the world for a particular piece of content. Kevin Tantrin is a young filmmaker in Hollywood that used to do a lot of music videos and kind of choreography tours. He directed the movie Fame, he directed the movie Glee 3D, but he realized that if he wanted to get real big dollars in Hollywood, he needed to do action films. He loved Mortal Kombat, so he actually put a short up on YouTube based on an origin story of his. It was live action. Put it up on YouTube and it blew up. He got the perennial phone call from Warner Brothers threatening to sue him, but he also got a phone call from a creative executive at Warner Brothers that said, "Hey, I don't get this. This is not Dog on a Skateboard. Why'd you do this? And come in and talk to me about it." And he convinced them to do a 90-minute film that would be over 10 episodes on Machinima that was live action based on Mortal Kombat, based on his concept. They agreed to do that because they were releasing the game. They thought, hey, any sort, it'll be a marketing event. And it actually blew up. It did almost 70 million views, numbers all around the world. And then the studio looked at that and said, hey, this was a dead brand from Warner Brothers Theatrical. They were no longer interested in the brand, but then they saw how he resurrected it on YouTube, and then they saw the numbers in Canada and Australia and in the UK, Germany, France, all the key territories that they're focused on, and decided to activate the film. So now he's actually making a theatrical film. So he changed the course of his career as a creator. The IP actually changed its course of its career, essentially as an opportunity. So I think that's one of the things that we're starting to see is this kind of incubation model that's more rational, where something can be done, on a smaller basis, but drive global views. And then you can sort of, I'll do more, and then if that works, I'll even do more. So that was kind of an interesting model.
And it provides transmedia opportunities. Halo being a good example. You've got a video game, you've got the novels, you've got the David Fincher produced hybrid trailer that came out 2 weeks ago, and this live action web series that's broadcasting on Machinima. So that's just another opportunity.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think in gaming, it's a little bit, people are thinking about it as, hey, this is both IP that we can explore, but it's also an incredibly effective marketing tool. The Mortal Kombat piece did about 12 to 13 times the amount of views and engagement that their traditional marketing trailers did. And so Halo looked at that and said, well, we're going to do the same thing. The game is coming out. We'll do a series around it. And then all of a sudden, you're starting to see this crazy appetite about narrative and gaming that is really starting to connect. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that later, but this is really an amazing story. As well as on the other side of the equation, there are a bunch of young developers outside of Los Angeles that created a game called Hawken. And it's a free-to-play, kind of mid-core type of shooter game. And what they did is they created a prototype, then made a video, put the video up. The video got a lot of views. They got financed out of that, and then we're now doing their marketing campaign. And the game, we've already driven a bunch of registered users for them. The game releases officially December 12th, and we think that's interesting. But again, it's another example of how narrative and gaming is coming together in a really intriguing way.
You've mentioned how you look to some of the early starters in the cable network business for some examples and some ideas on how to do things. Are there other lessons that you've learned from cable companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of insight there. I mean, I spent some time with Judy McGrath, who ran MTV for a long time, and one of the things that they, when they first started, they owned none of their intellectual property, literally zero. It was all owned by music companies. And now if you look at their primetime schedule, they own virtually all of it. HBO, I thought one of the great things that I spent a little time with Michael Fuchs, and he had a really interesting comment, which is when he was fighting for doing original programming, as you may remember, HBO was only a service that showed movies, Hollywood movies. When he was fighting to do original programming, he said, we didn't even know that the DVD would show up and kind of damage the notion of watching movies through television networks as opposed to watching them on DVD. And of course, we didn't know Netflix would show up. So we would have been dead twice had we not done original programming. I mean, one of the lessons that you see, all of them, you talk to AMC, you talk all these networks around the world, you realize that taking control of their own destiny becomes a really important element of that. And so starting to invest in your own programming, is an important point.
And so talk about how Machinima is doing that, both creating as well as licensing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing for us is that we see it as a spectrum. There's high engagement on these huge gaming brands like Halo and Call of Duty, et cetera. And then the first cousins to that are things like the Halo series, right, and the Mortal Kombat series. But we think that the audience loves things that are very technical, specific, like watch this guy go through a specific map, all the way. But they also love Walking Dead and Game of Thrones and Dark Knight and Prometheus and these kind of movies. So our theory is that you can begin to think about some of that type of content. And what we're starting to see is people thinking about it, because our marketing partners, we do a lot of advertising campaigns for movie studios, gaming publishers, and television networks, right? We did Homeland and Dexter and Walking Dead and all that on television. So it's kind of thinking about it in reverse. If you created a web series that was successful on Machinima, could it incubate a video game? Could it incubate an actual television series? Could it incubate a movie? That kind of thing. And so the interesting thing about having an audience that's global but very focused, meaning it's mostly males, all the people that love gaming or some form of that engagement, is that the stuff that resonates incredibly well. So, if we put Gossip Girl up on our site, it would do nothing, right? But if you talk about Walking Dead or Game of Thrones or these kind of movies or Call of Duty, it's huge engagement. So it's really kind of thinking about how do you use that in reverse to help create new IP or to resurrect IP that may not have worked in a traditional model.
But this all started ultimately with a bunch of creative tech geeks who were getting into the guts of graphic engines. And I'd like to talk about Machinima lowercase m and some of the key breakthrough moments in the history of Machinima as a creative movement. And to do so, I'd like to bring another voice into our conversation. Isabelle Arvers is a media art curator, critic, and author who specializes in video games, web animation, digital animation, retro gaming, 8-bit music, and Machinima. She's based in France, but for the past couple of weeks, she's been a visiting professor at Vancouver Centre for Digital Media. Please help me welcome Isabelle Arvers.
Hello.
Isabelle, tell us how you first became aware of Machinima. Was there a particular production that you saw that made you take notice?
Actually, the first time I heard about Machinima, I was part of one art video piece. The name was 366 Degrees, and it was done by a collective of French artists, Ultralab. And so it was partly shot in real life, and also you had some sequences of Unreal Tournament. But they didn't know they were doing a Machinima, by the way. And then I heard about Red versus Blue, who made it famous for sure. And I decided in 2005 to invite Bernie Burns on stage at the Pompidou Center. But you have to know that at that time it was not famous as you made it now. So it was quite fun. It was the beginning. And then the second thing, very important for me, in 2005, a guy, his name is Alex Chan, he did a movie in 1 week with the game The Movies, and it was about the riots in France. And he posted it on the website of Lionheads. And after 1 month, it was downloaded 40,000 times. And then it attracted attention from the media. For example, he was interviewed by Business Week and also, I don't remember all the media. And that's how I realized the power of Machinima as a new means of expression. Because this guy, before, he never done any movie. He was just a graphic designer, and he wanted to give a voice to those who, from the suburbs, who didn't have one. And that's where I really realized that it could be, again, a new way of expression.
Alan, what about you? What was the point at which you saw Machinima as something that was worthy of notice?
Well, it was really Hugh Hancock, is a Scottish filmmaker who actually coined the term Machinima and actually misspelled it, so that's why it's spelled that way. But when I first went to that meeting, I went and looked at the website, and I thought, well, this is interesting, and it was to the point here, kind of filmmakers trying to use this as a way of doing computer animation. And then I saw Red versus Blue. That was the big entry. But then we thought, well, maybe we could kind of expand the idea a bit and add really the notion of any kind of gamer documenting what they did, right? Because a lot of the early stuff was, hey, look, they did something amazing, and they would record it and they would show it to their friends. So that was kind of the first. It's almost like the milieu It's like the early films in cinema, right, where they would record people coming out of factories and those kinds of things. That's kind of like the beginning of Machinima, and then they got more sophisticated.
Yeah, the name was the speed runs, but we could also say that the ancestor of Machinima were the demo scene. I don't know if you know about it, but it was a movement from the 80s, and the idea was to crack the cartridge and to put your name inside the introductory credit sequence. And then it became very famous, and people were meeting in big stadiums in Europe. And they created some clans, and the first Machinima ever done, let's say, was in 1996, and it was by the Rangers clan, which was from the demo scene. So that's how everything began, and it was done with the game Quake.
Is technology, the ability to actually get in and be a technologist, is that what separates Machinima from pure animation?
I tried many times to push the animation world to get an interest into Machinima, and they keep on saying that it's not really animation. So, because it's not really done frame per frame, because it's a 3D rendering, so perhaps you have a better, because you come from the animation world, so you have a better answer than...
Well, I mean, I think the thing about it is games. There's a lot of fixed animations, and there's an AI engine that says, take cover when someone's shooting at you, kind of thing. But if you think about it, it's sort of it potentially could be kind of the future of animation, where you can build environments and say, well, this is a table that's actually you can break, right? Or these rooms have certain properties, and therefore I don't have to tell the character, just like a live action character. You don't tell them, move your hand like this and do this. You sort of give them motivations, and then they can actually do certain things. And so I think the way the Machinima world looks at it is that we're trying to make the world of animation be more like a director that would set, like a David Fincher on a set that would talk to a great actor, and then great actor would interpret the idea and put on their own movements, etc.
And if you take the new tool created by Valve, Source Filmmaker, it really merged animation, 3D rendering. It's going to be hard to make the difference between.
So the definition, the operational definition of Machinima is changing, not just in terms of how your company leverages that, but also within the creative industry itself. Which
is good, because definitions make things die.
They're limiting?
Yeah. So it's not
well, it comes from a hacker culture, so hackers will always continue to hack. You know what I mean? So I think it's hard to imagine that it'll stay a fixed thing.
Isabel, you've talked about Red versus Blue, which was the use of the Halo game engine to do essentially comedic shorts, and I think they're into their 15th season of production on Red versus Blue now. Were there other examples of Machinima that you think are particularly noteworthy as that creative field has progressed?
So I already mentioned the French Democracy, the movie created by Alex Chan, because it was one of the first political, social critic Machinima ever done. I would also speak about The Awakening, which was shot with The Sims, because it was done also by a girl, so April Hoffman, and that was one of the first time who somebody did a movie that was not totally directed to the game world. It was done. She really focused on the storytelling. So it was, I think, very important for the Machinima world. Then my favorite Machinima is This Spartan Life, because I don't know if you know about it. It's a game show. It's a TV show inside the game world. It's shot in Halo, and it's done by somebody's name Chris Burke. He's a chiptune musician. And what is interesting is that he's speaking about digital culture. He's speaking about game culture inside a game. So I think it's really the type of wheels into the wheels, or self-referential. In French, we would say mise en abîme. And I think for me it's very, very interesting, and especially because it's shot in the network game. So you have many players around, and they don't know what is happening. So of course they shoot the interviewee. So Chris Buckthorpe.
And so is that produced real time? I'm curious as to how would the creators then deal with the fact that their character was just sniped?
It's real time and not real time. Because it's real time, so for sure sometimes the guest dies during the interview, but then they edit it.
Jimmy Kimmel take note.
Yeah. So it's half.
It's kind of like a TV show in the middle of a war zone, I think. By the way, another example, a very popular cultural version, not so much sophisticated, is South Park they won an Emmy for Make Love Not Warcraft. You can see it on iTunes, and literally half of it is in World of Warcraft Machinima. It's very funny, but it's one of the ones where the entertainment industry looked at it and said, "Oh, I get it, right?" You know what I mean? Because for a while they would say, "What is this?" And then that sort of put it on the map from the traditional media perspective.
Right. It took Trey and Matt to make everybody else realize that it was worthy of notice.
And to come back to France, there is an amazing, if you never saw any Machinima, you should have a look to Bill and John, because it's one of the most amazing Machinima ever done. Compared to the French Democracy, which was done in 1 week, Bill and John was done in 2 years, because the guys are from the animation world, so they were doing it at night, let's say. So they really worked on the voice action, because it's done with the game Lock-on Modern Combat. So you can't use the face, you can't animate the character. So everything comes from the dialogues, and they really worked on it. And it's really an amazing one. And each time I show it, because, yeah. Yeah.
So Machinima really it's a hybrid form then, because it relies so much on the narrative power of writing and story crafting. It relies on voice talent and direction.
And also on collaborative working. I read once an interview you gave about perhaps that one day there won't be any more Festival de Cannes, because Machinima will kill Hollywood cinema. But that's true that one of the most interesting parts in Machinima is that you have to imagine that people are looking for their actors on the web. They give meetings to gamers to have avatars in their movies. So it's really a collaborative way of working, and through the network, which is very different from traditional filmmaking.
Something you mentioned in our conversation earlier today was the creators are us.
We are the creators. Yes, and perhaps you refer to the documentary Molotov Alva, which was done in Second Life, and Douglas Gayton actually wanted to make a documentary about what means Second Life, and the story, which is very good by the way, is that we are looking for the creator. During all the movie, we are looking for the creator. Who did Second Life? And at the end, sorry to tell you the end, but
spoiler alert.
We are the creators, and it's a very interesting way, to speak about intellectual property, because Linden Lab has a very different type of business model if you compare it to other game publishers, because they just own their logo and their name, Second Life. And if you want to make a movie inside Second Life, you have to ask the authorization to all the avatars and all the owners of universes and places. So we are really the creator in Second Life.
And Alan, that's something that Machinima, the company, has really leveraged, this idea of the user being the creator and the blurring distinctions between those.
Yeah, I mean, I think initially a lot of people, looked at YouTube and looked at this environment as just like kind of kids doing something. They put up a video of something they did. But what I was referring to in the film festival stuff, is what we're starting to see a generation of filmmakers. In the old model, you used to do a short and you'd go to the film festival circuit, right? You'd show your short at Sundance and Slam Dance and all these places. And they're realizing that if you make those shorts work on on brands like Machinima, you can get huge numbers, and those huge numbers can lead you to the next step. And Neil Blomkamp was one of the best examples. He did the Halo short, on YouTube. That was supposed to lead to the Halo movie. It didn't happen, but it led to District 9, and now Neil's one of the top filmmakers in the world. We had one that was really, we talked about Mortal Kombat, but there's one based on Portal, the game. This guy Dan Trachtenberg did that. That's led him to be a guy that's working on a J.J. Abrams project. So that there is this issue of user generated and capturing your life and documenting your gameplay if you're just a regular film gamer. But there are also these kind of new generation of filmmakers that are armed with great digital tools, this crazy ability of distribution on YouTube, and the notion of like, I'm going to go get numbers, and that numbers will I can build my audience and I can build my creative life in public. Really, we do a lot more of what we've ever done in public, so the IP is more in public, the development of the IP is more in public, and the development of you as a creator is in public.
Now, Tancherone and Trachtenberg and Blomkamp had Peter Jackson behind him. These are people who are already in the industry, so they've got a leg up. They're not, Joe or Josephine down the street in their basement. So do they still have the same opportunities?
Oh, yeah. Look, it's just a question of, like, we don't care whether Dan, in that case, Dan was already working, and he, was represented by ICM in LA, but I don't think that makes any difference at all. And in fact, we see people from all over the world that, like you were talking about, the videos that you were talking about. In fact, our first big hit was a hit called Arby and the Chief, which was from John Graham, which was a Canadian filmmaker. And so I think this is an international, global community. Some of our biggest game videos come from Germany, from France, from all over the world. So what it does break down is this issue of, we've always lived in a world where there's a gatekeeper that says you cannot show your content unless you have my permission as a television network or a movie studio. At least that is gone. If you make something compelling, you can put it up. Right now, whether a lot of people will see it or not is a different matter, but at least that part of the gatekeeper is gone. And then the digital tools, not just in the computer side, but the nature of the cameras and the editing and stuff is way more powerful than we've ever seen. So there's a lot less impediment on doing something creative, and there's a global audience out there.
Did you want to follow up on that? I'm curious then, because Alan's quite clearly his company's interested in the commercial aspects of things, but you're focusing on more of the artistic side of things. So do you want to talk about how creators who maybe don't have profile already are able to use this process and this form to do what they want to do?
What is interesting is that now it merges, for example, on this channel, Machinima.com, because the Machinima makers are now have this opportunity to get some notoriety using this website, and perhaps there is not a problem, and now we can say that half of the Machinima maker come from the traditional filmmaking world, because you have dedicated Machinima software, so you don't need to be a gamer to create a Machinima nowadays, and they really use it as a platform to get more well-known. And if we take the example of a movie, the name is The Trash Master, and it's a long feature. It was done in GTA 4, only by one person in 1 year and a half. And now, I don't know if you published it on Machinima.com, The Trash Master?
I think so,
yeah. Yes. And also it was diffused in many, many festivals. So I think that the two worlds can meet. And
the lines of everything are blurring today.
Yeah.
We're also seeing, even in the traditional media, live action directors doing animation, right? And so if you think about that, really, if you're a creative director, you don't necessarily either need to be a gamer or even an animation person to really think about doing things in these worlds. And in some ways, Machinima makes it easier because it's more like live action filmmaking, right? It's sort of puppeteering. You're not really sitting there frame by frame creating the articulation. So there's an opportunity there.
No, I was just thinking about the future of Machinima.
Well, and that's where I'd like to take us next. I'm glad you're thinking that way. So, I mean, it's come a long way in 10 years. Where's it going?
Okay, so I think we have three directions. one was already created by your channel. What I am interested in right now is interactive machinima, because once I went to Brazil and somebody asked me, is there a specific narrative for machinima? Does the fact that you are inside a game space, does it influence the way you tell story? And I was a bit sorry because I couldn't say yes. So now I'm really trying to push this kind of interactive machinima, because it's not just push the button and see the following story. It could be very interesting to mix game levels, for example, and narrative and storytelling. Also, you could use Kinects to make interactive machinima. I would love to see interactive installations, because I'm an art curator. So I would love to see interactive installations through a Kinect, but done in machinima. If you look at the web documentary scene, and for example, Collapsus or Prison Valley, they really mix narrative, storytelling, games, and I think that I would love to see a web documentary done in machinima. And since I was here as a visiting professor at the Center for Digital Media, one of the students, he asked me, could we make a generative machinima? And I was like, wow, genial. Genial, pardon. So could be also something, you know.
Mm. Well, I mean, I think that's right, and I think that interactive narrative is clearly one direction. The other, I think, is just the computing power of the platforms keep increasing. So I think one of the ways you could think about it in the future, if you look at the movie Avatar, the computer side of that, you could see that the imagery that you could play with, the intelligence of the animations, the sophistication of the systems will get more and more, so that I think you'll see incredible kind of visual capability in machinima. And then I think the third component, which was just talking about, is really the notion of machinima as a real-time event, meaning it's not rendered into a video and then you play back a video, but it's actually rendered as a real-time event. So some things could be customized to what you want to do. That gets back to the interactive. If I go in one direction, it does something. Or maybe if I'm in Paris, I see something that looks like Paris, and I'm in New York, I see something that looks like New York. And so I think that, with the power of the computing side, because we have to think about, I used to be in the early days of computer animation when we were talking about this before, that it would take an hour to render a frame, at 512 resolution, and now the Xbox and the iPads are rendering, titles like Assassin's Creed and Call of Duty and Halo that are very high resolution, lots of complexity going on there. So you imagine what that means, right? That's like, I think someone said there was, 100,000 or 500,000 times the processing power from when Pixar first made Toy Story to 3 or 4 years ago. So ultimately, you can imagine being able to render things like 300 or render things at Pixar quality in real time and animate them in real time. That becomes a really exciting future, I think, for creatives, and doesn't require you to be an animator to do it. That's the real opportunity.
And the last thing is that more people from different disciplines will know about machinima. I mean, for example, musicians, architects. Yes, there is a phone. And so on. More they will know about machinima, and they will take it from their perspective. And I think it's just the beginning. And what is funny is that a few years ago, people were saying, "Oh, I think it's the end of machinima," and we can see that it's not. And I'm sure more people will know about it, because the word in itself doesn't speak. Because machinima, nobody knows what it is, but actually, if you see them, I know it's a movie done with a game engine, and yeah, perhaps could be that the merge of different disciplines.
So the technological innovations that Alan was talking about, are we seeing that matched by creative innovations? You touched a bit on people wondering if narrative within machinima is different, or can they generate? I assume they meant generate real time. The machinima. Are there creative leaps happening with machinima in the same way that we're seeing technological leaps?
We're not necessarily seeing them in machinima videos themselves, but you're seeing them in the culture. I mean, if you look at even the way Avatar was shot, if you look at the way people are shooting and creating shows like Spartacus, where they're using the models of motion capture and blue screen and putting actors in front of them, a lot of the things that the game industry has done for a long time, I think we're starting to see the influence of that. And I also think that there is this idea of more and more, as the tools get more and more powerful, more and more people enter them. But I do think that we've even in the movie business, we have seen George Miller doing, as an example, live action director doing something that's, in machinima, and the Brad Birds doing animators that are doing live action. So we're seeing people cross those boundaries in interesting ways. And I think when that starts to happen, what does it look like when David Fincher does a machinima or an animated project, right? We've seen what Tim Burton can do, right? So you can see that the combination of these types of skill sets, to your point, are they architects, graphic designers? That's what made the film industry, right? Where you had Eisenstein was an architect, and other people came from narrative forms, they came from theater, they came from all different disciplines, and brought those ideas to cinema and changed the landscape. And I think that's kind of you're starting to see that happen. I think more of that will happen.
I think before we get too far ahead, let's open it up to the floor for questions. Does anybody have questions for Isabel and Alan? Hold up your hand, the mic will come to you.
Yeah. Hi. So I was just wondering, to go back to the notion of we are the creators, but if we bring to it a commercial or a distribution perspective, suppose you make this great emergent gameplay narrative within a game universe, and it's real time, and you record it, but then you want to do something with it. Maybe you want to see if you can get it into film festivals, or maybe try to get distribution for it. Do you not run into legal ramifications then? Who is the IP owner or the creator? Is it the company that made the game? Do they own your film? Or as the creator, do you actually own it? And you're laughing, so I guess there's something to it.
Well, I think that what we see is it depends on the title, right? Like if you look at, for example, League of Legends recently has published that said you can do anything you want with our content. So you can actually go to some of these sites and they'll give you criteria on which you can do things, and if they're game publisher. If you think you've got something really interesting, like the Red versus Blue people, you can actually get a license from 343, the owners of Halo as an example, or whatever the case might be. I think overall what we see, of course, is the gaming industry their revenue line is around games, right? So the issue for them is this has been an incredible win, right? In the music industry, you have to pay the David Finchers of the world to make the Madonna video and then distribute it. Right here, you've got the community doing this stuff at no cost to you as a game publisher, creating crazy engagement. Right, with Call of Duty, there'll be maybe 500 million video views in 2 or 3 weeks around when that stuff comes out, and it just creates this tsunami of crazy activity. If you want to take it beyond, hey, it's a video on YouTube or it's a video on Machinima, and you say, oh, I want to put it on television, then you're going to have to get the rights. And like Doug had to get the rights for the HBO version of Molotov Alva, or as I said, the Red versus Blue guys had the rights. Clearly, the South Park guys had the rights, etc. But if you're doing something really creative and it really works, that's doable. Obviously, if you're damaging the brand or doing something weird, it's not going to be doable.
And if you do a machinima with a dedicated machinima software like Movie Storm, you can really do what you want with it.
Because that's not using the IP, right? So just to be clear about this, there's two issues when you make machinima. There is the game engine, and a lot of that can be easily licensed, meaning that's the thing that renders things in real time, etc. And then there are the game assets. So Red versus Blue does both. It uses the Halo engine and it uses the Halo assets, meaning the characters and the world. In the traditional model of machinima, it's sort of using that world. That's where the IP issues become. So you can use other tools that are machinima-like, that you're using assets that are not part of a game. That's a completely different model. But I mean, I think what filmmakers do is they say, I'm going to use a machinima thing to show that I can tell a story. And I can tell a story, and I do really well. And maybe if that works really well, I can do something with it. And if that doesn't, if that progresses my career, and then all of a sudden we say, wow, look what he did. Let's do something else. But there are a lot of the stuff, even the live action things, Mortal Kombat, the Halo series. We did one distributed a series called Bright Falls, which was based, on Alan Wake. They're all licenses at some point, if you're going to do something beyond just gameplay.
And just be careful to the third-party issues like music, or, for example, the vehicles in some games, because you could get some troubles for that. So, yeah.
Yeah, copyright and IP is our next discussion. Other questions? If you got your hand up, I can't see you, so jump up. Otherwise, I'm going to thank our guests. Thanks to Alan DeBevoise and Isabel Arvers for their time and their insights. Thank you for joining us. Remember that Alan's going to be taking a few business meetings in the Biz Center, and you can talk to Sky Davies to set up an appointment if that's something that you'd like to take advantage of. Isabel, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.